Hello. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing good myself, I guess.
How was your move?
It's over. So I'll say that much.
Moving is no fun.
Oh,
Even
yeah.
if you're like excited about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, congratulations on your move, Alice. I don't think I've
Yeah.
said that yet, but
It's not happening for another month, but
Oh wow.
Jenna's less excited about my move.
yeah.
No. I'm super supportive until she said she's leaving.
Okay. Yeah. Hello.
Oh, hey Tristan. Oh, who's that?
What?
Is that your
That's
dad?
my dad. That's my dad. Yeah.
Hi, Tristan's dad.
Oh, he's long gone. I'll tell him you said hi later, though.
Are you in San Diego?
No, I'm in Santa Cruz.
Oh, you met halfway. Interesting.
Yeah,
Like,
sort of thing.
yeah.
You
Cute.
know. Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Tristan, you have some great COVID hair going right now.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. That's one thing I need to figure out if I can get my hair cut before I go.
Do it today.
No, because she so I've always gone to this one woman and she moved to Marin, to her salon's in Marin now, so it's like a bit of a trek. Mill Valley, to be precise.
How's everyone doing? All right. I think we're still waiting on a few more people. We'll probably get started. This one won't be as intensive as the last one, so don't worry about that. But yeah. Basically, we're just going to be focusing on finally connecting our back end with our front end. And that's basically it. And kind of going over some new stuff as well, just a little bit. And then at the end, we are actually going to be doing a Kahoot. Yes. And I think we have it so that the winners are actually going to get a prize. So hopefully you guys have been paying attention. But yeah, I'll wait like another minute or so in case anyone else wants to hop in or join.
Is there anyone, I know that, who is it? Pari and Sachi said they couldn't make it, but I'm wondering if there's anyone I should like specifically at. Jimmy also can't make it because he's getting vaccinated.
All right, I saw that, yeah.
Oliver and Calvin?
Yeah, I think those are the only ones left. All right. I guess with that, we could probably get started then. If they want to join, they'll join in. But yes, I wanted to kind of confirm to make sure everyone has a working backend. Has everyone tested out their backend, at least able to add things to their actual database, maybe even edit or test out all the different routes? Was everyone able to do that and successfully add stuff to your database? Yes. Okay. because I know last time we kind of like rushed things at the very end and we didn't really get to testing. So I just wanted to make sure everyone's database is in working order.
Mine is not working, but I think it might be like a Windows issue.
Hmm.
I don't know if any of the installed packages are working because NodeMon just stopped working as well. I
Oh,
tried like reinstalling it and everything, and it's in the
interesting.
path, but it was working before. And then when I added Postgre to the path, then NodeMon stopped working.
Interesting. What does your package.json looks like for
I
specifically
was
for your
watching
backend?
it back and it looked the same as yours as far as I can tell.
Okay, yeah, dev dependencies, nodemon, pgh store. Yeah, that looks pretty good. What happens when you try running?
So instead of NodeMon, it says React script start, and then
Oh, that's because you're currently in your React. So you need to make sure you're inside of your backend folder directory to run npm start. So you can actually create a and make sure you cd
that?
into backend.
Oh, that's why. Okay, cool.
And now try
Thank you,
doing
thank
npm
you.
start.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so you got
Um,
something. Interesting. Let's see.
dialect thing.
Dialect needs to be supplied. That's most likely in your, let's see. It could be in your db config file. Oh, it looks like you have dialect right here. Okay. Take a look at your, so this looks pretty good. Take a look at your models index.js.
Okay.
Okay. dbconfig.dialect. All right. Okay. So it looks like you're getting it. Dialect needs to be explicitly interesting. So it looks like it should be getting it. Host dialect, and that's lowercase. This is an interesting error. Let me look at your dbconfig file one more time. Yep, and it is separated by a comma. Interesting. All right, let's see. What could be the problem?
It says exports instead of exports.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Nick. I probably wouldn't have seen that. And I think you misspelled sequelize. Yes, the bane of any coder typos.
Oh, where is that?
It looks like an index.js,
Index.
line 13. Right there, yeah. Ooh, all right. Okay, so now this is a password authentication failed for user Postgres. Postgres is with one S, I believe. Unless when you set up your database, you set it up with
I did the
S.
default.
Okay, so yeah, it should just be one S. There we go, perfect.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. And hopefully you can test out your routes in the meantime or anything. But for the time being, we're going to move forward and kind of go from there. And actually, this might be a good time to test it out since we're going to combine our front end with our back end. All right. So Let me jump in and share my screen. Okay, so all right, so basically this is all of our code we've had so far. We have our backend and we have our front end React stuff with all of our components and all our good things. So mainly what we're going to be working on is all these different things that we want to add to our to-do list in our to-do components so that they can connect with our backend. All right. So to kind of make this a little more organized and to make this kind of as clean as possible, we're going to make another folder inside of our src folder. So basically in the same kind of level as where components is, we're going to create another folder and we're going to call it services. The naming convention doesn't necessarily matter, but just know that it's a service that we're going to be just calling different functions from here. So in here, we're going to create a new folder called services. All right. And inside of our services folder, we're going to create a new file and we're going to call it to-do service.js. All right. So this is basically, this is going to be the main function that handles all of our connectivity to our backend server, right? This is going to be basically how we connect from our React side to our Express backend. So this is going to be a very hefty, but not nearly as hefty as creating the backend itself. All right. So what we need to do is we need to kind of create essentially what we're trying to export. So for right now, we're going to create a object that I'll call to-do service. All right. So basically, I'm going to create a simple JavaScript object that's going to have key and value pairs. The key is going to be the function name, and the value is going to be the actual function of connecting to our database. All right. And before I forget, I want to make sure I also export this. So I'm going to export default to-do service. All right. So that way, whenever I'm trying to require something from this file or get something from this file, it's getting specifically this object. Okay. So now we're basically going to do 4 different functions, right? Kind of the same functionality that we had in our database. Being able to create a to-do, being able to read the to-dos, update, and delete. Basically these CRUD functions, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to do all of these different types of functions. So the first one is, I'm going to call it create to-do. All right. So here I'm passing in a key that is called create to-do. And I'm going to create a function as its value. In this case, I'm going to use the arrow notation function, something that we've done before. And now this one is going to be interesting because in order to create a to-do, we actually need to pass in some information, right? We need to pass in what the task is by default. So we're going to pass in some new task that we're trying to create for our to-do. All right, so we're going to pass that in as a parameter. Now, inside of this function, we're actually going to return something immediately. What we're going to do actually is we're going to call the fetch function. Now, the fetch function is a built-in JavaScript function that lets us connect to basically anything. It lets us connect to APIs, other servers, anywhere that we want to. And the good thing about this fetch command is that it actually returns a promise that lets us kind of do something when we actually get that information. So now because of our application, because we are sending requests, nothing is going to happen instantaneously, right? It's going to take some time for a request to actually get sent to wherever server or wherever the location of that server is. So it's not going to happen instantaneously. So JavaScript has things called a promise that allows us to kind of wait until we actually finish the execution of this task, or in this case, this promise, and we can do something once we kind of finish it. So the good news is that we can easily just fetch something and return the actual promise object. So that way, when we actually apply it in our components, in our React components, we can manipulate the data, set our state, everything that we need to in there. All right. But now the first thing that we need to know is the location of where of what we're trying to fetch. So now here, to make things a little easier, we're going to create a constant. And this is basically just going to be our URL, our location of where our backend is going to be. So here, we're just going to say it's an http://localhost. And here, we're going to say 8080, since that's the port we defined it to be. If you changed it, make sure you kind of change it to the one you had before. And because of our backend, we had the /API/todos. All right, so this is going to be our default URL that we're trying to connect to our backend. All right, and this is based off of how we set it up in our backend last time, if you recall. All right, so now back in our fetch request, we are just going to pass in our URL. But we need to pass in more things as well. The other information that we need is kind of like this initialization stuff. So when we actually make a request, you actually need to send, or you can send multiple things at a time, right? When you're making a request, the actual request has a lot of data inside of it. So we can kind of define those different things to make sure that we're sending the correct information and that we're getting the correct information back as well. So here, we're going to create an object to kind of specify all the things that we need to clear up. The first thing that we want to do is we need to make sure that the method that we're sending is a post request. And again, a post request means that we're actually sending some type of data to wherever it is that we're sending it. Since we're trying to create a new task, we need to send this new task information or this data to our backend. So that's why this is going to be a post request. And this is how we specify that it's a post request. Okay. Now that we have this, the next thing we need to do is we need to have some headers. So now headers are essentially kind of like a lot more detail of what this request is going to do. But to kind of simplify it, we can kind of just say what kind of information we're trying to get. Specifically, what's our content type that we're trying to receive. That's kind of the main thing that we want to do here, because we want to make sure that it is application JSON. We want to make sure that we're getting back JSON. Here we can also specify other things as well, like a XML format or any other type of kind of format. But the way that we set up our backend, we allow JSONs, so that way we make sure we're getting JSONs back. All right, so now that we've set up this header, the last thing we have to do is we need to set up a body. So now the body, if you recall, was kind of the information that we were able to kind of parse through in our backend. That's the information that has all the information that we need to read. So we need to be able to send this new task information into our body. But unfortunately, we can't just put it in here by default. We have to actually make sure that it's in a proper format. The easiest way to kind of make sure that it's in a proper format is to use json.stringify. And this is a JavaScript constant and a specific method that basically tries to convert whatever we have in here into some type of JSON object. In this case, we can easily just pass in some type of object, in which case we need to make sure that our body has a key, or in this case, a property called task. So now that's important because if you recall back in our backend, we actually looked through something that was called rec.body.task. This is where we're setting the task to be. All right. So this is actually kind of important because if this is called something else, the backend won't work. We need to make sure that this part right here and our backend are the same in order for them to kind of work together. All right. So here we're going to pass in our task, and the value we're going to pass is essentially the new task we're passing into the function, our new task. All right. And that's essentially our fetch quest, or our our fetch function, right? So we're saying where it is we're fetching it, and what the information that we're trying to send as well, right? The three main things are what type of method we're trying to do, the specific headers associated to it, and if there's a body, include some type of body. All right. But we need to do one final thing before this create to do thing is done. So like I mentioned before, we're going to get some type of promise object. Now this promise object that we're going to get needs to be converted into a JSON so that we can actually read the object that we're getting back. Otherwise, it won't be kind of readable in our React code. So to easily kind of do this, we're just going to do a .then, which we can easily kind of do on any promise object. And in which case, we're going to get some type of response, right? So when you send a request, you get some type of response back. So once we get this response, we want to do something. Essentially, we want to just make sure that it is in a JSON format so that we can read it. So now, whenever we call this function, we're going to make a request with the right information. We're going to then receive a response, and then we're just going to essentially convert that response into a readable format so that way we can manipulate whatever it is that we need to. All right? Cool. So that's basically our create to do function. All right. So I'll leave this up here for a little bit so you guys can copy it fully. And yeah, feel free to cut me off if you have any questions or anything. But yeah. And basically now we just need to do essentially the same thing for our three other functions that we need to do. All right. So now we have our create to do. We need to be able to update our to do. So again, we're going to add another property, in which case we're going to have a function. Now in our update one, this one's going to be interesting because we actually need multiple things. Back in our backend, if you recall, our route specifically for, where is it? Yes, if I open up our to-do routes, specifically the controller actually, and if I look at the update, here I need to get an ID and other stuff in the body. So now the thing in the body that we need to put inside is both the actual task and if it's been completed. So we need to make sure that we pass all of those three things inside of this function in order for it to kind of connect properly. So we need to pass in an ID. We need to pass in a new task if the task was changed, though we're not going to be dealing with that yet. most of the time, we're going to be more worried about if it's been completed. So that for sure we need to pass in. All right, so just like before, create a simple arrow notation function. And inside of this function, do the exact same thing. We're going to call fetch, so that way we can connect to our database. In which case, we're going to pass in our URL. But now here, if you recall, our specific route is not just this route. We're specifying it at a specific location. So going back to our to-do routes, our update added this parameter of ID. So not only is it at /API/todos, but it's also at / whatever value that is. So it's not just going to be at this location, but also adding the ID associated to it. And since we're passing ID in, this is an easy way to kind of combine them together. And the way that JavaScript works is because this URL is a string and this ID is a number, it'll auto-convert the ID or the number into a string. So that way this is a proper string URL that we can actually search. And then also, I should probably put a / here, so that way it'll properly go to the correct location. All right, because if we didn't have that / it would just be to-dos like 4, which will give you an error. All right, so make sure we have this / at the end too. Okay, awesome. So now that we have this fetch at this specific URL with our ID included, we now need to pass in all of the information. So now here, we need to make sure that we have our method. And again, here, since we're actually updating information and based off of our routes that we created earlier, we made sure that it was a put route. So we need to make sure that the method is a put method. All right. And just like the other one before, we need to set up our headers. So in this case, it's going to be the exact same thing. Make sure that our content type is application JSON. And that'll be it for our header. And now here, the last thing we need is our body. And just like how we did before with our previous body, we're going to json.stringify. All right. And now here, we're able to kind of add the task to make sure that it's the new task, as well as adding completed. So now this notation might seem maybe confusing, but in JavaScript, specifically, I think that ES6, which is like the newest version of JavaScript, this allows you to kind of just simply just put the key value if they're named the exact same thing. So if I just put the word completed here, it's the same as if I were to do this, right? Because I have the property of completed and the value of completed coming from my function. So just as like a shorthand notation, I can kind of just leave it like this, and JavaScript knows automatically to assign that property to that value because they're named the same thing. Okay, awesome. So now that we have that fetch pretty much done, and looking at my object notation, I want to make sure it's correct. Yep, this parentheses is where my fetch is done. So now here is where I want to do the exact same thing. I want to do a .then, in which case I'm going to get some type of response, in which case I'm going to do response.json. So also another thing to note is with arrow notated functions, if you do not have a curly bracket, you can only have one line inside of it. And by default, it returns whatever it is you put on the one line. So here we'll note that in this .then, we're actually returning JavaScript or JSON. In this case, what we're actually returning is a promise that has data equal to this object. That way we can kind of read through it. All right. Awesome. So now 2 functions are down, 2 more to go. So we got create, update. I kind of did it not in order, but that's fine. Next thing we got to do is we need to be able to read our to-do. All right. And this one's probably going to be simpler, mostly because all we need from it is just an ID. Right? We need to know which ID, or actually no, since this one is going to be, we're going to call it read to do's. So now I want to be kind of clear, mostly because our application is very specific. We don't have a path that gets one to do. So in this case, we're just going to read all of the to do's, and I just wanted to be a little clear on that. And since we're grabbing all the to-dos, we actually don't need to pass anything inside of our function, right? Because all we're doing is just grabbing all of the to-dos. All right, if this was kind of like read one to-do, I would need to pass in an ID to get that specific to-dos information. All right, so this one's going to be probably the simplest function, right? So again, we need to return fetch like how we normally do. And here we're going to pass in our URL. And here we need to pass in all of our information. In this case, the method that we're getting, again, since we're only grabbing information, we're not actually sending any information. It's just going to be a simple get method. All right. And then by default, we got to set in our headers. Content type, application, JSON. And here, since we're not sending any information, because it's a simple get method, we actually don't need a body, right? The only reason why we need a body is if we're actually sending information. But in this case, we're not sending anything, so we don't need it. So then all we need to do after is a .then response.json. And there we go. That's our simple read to do's function. Probably the easiest out of all of them. All right, so now we have our create, our read, our update. The last one we need is to be able to delete a to-do. All right, so let's get started on that. Delete to-do. All right, and now this one, we need to know which to-do we're trying to delete. So we definitely need to send information. So we need to send the ID. Since the ID is probably the easiest identification to say which to-do we're trying to delete. You could try to do like task or something, but on the off chance that like you might have multiple tasks with the same name, it's probably preferable to do it by ID. All right, so here we have our simple function, in which case we do our return fetch call. And again, we're going to pass in our URL. And in this case, we're going to also pass in our ID. Just like how we were able to update, we need to specify the path of /ID. So that way, when our backend receives it, it knows to run that specific route. All right. And again, another object to have all of our information. We need to specify the method. In this case, because of our routes, the route is a delete route. So our method is going to be delete. All right. This method lets us know which route we're actually going to. All right. Now that we have that, we got to set up our headers. Again, content type application JSON. And here, since we're not actually sending information, right? We actually don't need a body. Even though we are passing in an ID, it's only being passed in as the part of the URL. So we actually don't need any information to send. So again, we don't need any body. All right, and then after that, our simple dot then. And there we go. All of our service functions done. All right. All right. Now that we have all of our functions pretty much in order, this is actually all the hard work. So good job, everyone. Now, next thing we got to do is actually use it in our components, right? So the first one we want to look at is our to-do list component, right? So if you don't recall, you'll probably want to look in your SRC folder, go to components, and our to-do list, right? So now it might have been a long time since you last looked at this. Hopefully you guys don't forget what all of this means. But I'll kind of like recap a little bit here to kind of just guide everything that we need to do. So essentially, in this specific component, we've created different states, right? To kind of keep track of our to-dos, this new task that we're going to type in, and also to show if it's been completed. So now here, we've set up our dummy to-dos, right? So if you're actually running your app, it probably looks something like this with all of with the dummy to-do information that you've added before, right? But now here, we're gonna kind of just change this, in which case, we're not going to call our function set to-dos here. We're actually gonna comment this out. You can delete it as well, but here we're going to comment it out so that way it doesn't update our state. So now when we run it and I try to refresh, I shouldn't have any to-dos, right? Because it's not actually changing the state of this component. All right. So now in here, I want to be able to load the to-do objects from our database. All right. That essentially means we want to go into our to-do service and call this read to-dos function. So that way we can grab all of the to-dos. But once we grab it, then we will call our set to-dos based off of this. All right. So going back to our to-do list, we need to first be able to import our service, right? So going up all the way at the top, we can do, it doesn't necessarily matter where we'll put it. I guess I'll put it here. We'll import to do service. And we'll say from, and we got to specify the path. So since we're in service, or since we're in components, we need to go back one, go into services, and access to do service. And here we don't need to specify .js, but I like doing that just to be more clear. Just make sure it's the same name as what you have in here. If you added any capitals or anything, make sure you include that as well. But yeah, now I have to do service. So now this to do service is essentially this giant object that has all these functions as properties. So now I'm going to actually call it inside of my use effect, right? So instead of just calling a set to-dos on this dummy list, we're going to set to-dos on the data that we get back calling our read to-dos function. So here, I'm going to access my to-do service object that I just imported. And here I'm going to say dot read to-dos. And I'm going to call that function. So now that I call this function, it's going to run this, fetch this URL, send this object, get a response, and convert it into some type of JSON object. So now what I'm getting back is a promise object. So now what I can do in this promise object is I can do a .then, just like how I did before. And now I'm getting some type of data. Right? So now inside of my .then, I will say data and then just create a simple arrow notation function. In which case, all I want to do is now call set to-dos using this data. So now what happens is, because a request is not instantaneously, we're going to wait until we get it back. Once we get that information, we're then going to change our state given that information. So now when I save and I refresh, now I have my to-dos from my specific database. So you guys can check and hopefully see your to-dos. Oh yeah, I still gotta cook dinner. Awesome. Is everyone seeing their to-dos on their React side? Because so far all we can do right now is be able to just read them. We can't submit a new task or even change it just yet. But at least we can see them. All right. So now let's work on the other functions as well. So now we're able to read our to-dos on our React app. Cool. So now this gets a little complicated, but I'll try to explain to the best that I can. So most of our state that keeps track of our application is inside of this to-do list component. We also have a to-do component that actually displays the actual checkbox, the task name, as well as a delete button. So now here we run into an issue where if we click on this delete button, we want to delete this specific task. But here in our to-do list, this list keeps track of the state hosting, or kind of like listing out all of our to-dos. So not only do we want to be able to change things inside of this component, but we also want to change things inside of this component as well. So the way we kind of work around that is we're going to create and call our functions directly in this component and pass those functions inside of those the to-do component as props. All right. So I'll explain that once we actually get there. But that's kind of the basis of why we're doing the thing that we're going to do right now. So we need to create our functions. All right. So if you remember before, we should have some type of function called add to do. All right. And now here we just need to change this so that it actually calls to our database, in which case our backend, in which case we need to call our service function that we created earlier. So first things first, we want to keep this prevent default. right? That way we're not submitting anything and we don't get a page refresh. That's the more important thing. We do want to do this eventually, but not right away. The first thing we want to do is call our to-do service, specifically the create to-do function. All right, so now we're calling our create to-do function. But now here, we need to pass in some type of value. What we're doing is, since we are currently located in our to-do list component, we have access to our state. And if you recall, we have a state called new task. This new task is the task we're trying to add. So we can easily pass in new task. All right. So now that we create this to-do, we pass in this new task that gets created. All right. And again, it's going to go to our service, does everything that it needs to, and it's going to return some type of promise object. In which case, we can do another .then, get some data, and do something once we get our data. And now what we want to do when we get our data is essentially all of this. We want to set our to-dos. We want to clear the new task field so that the actual input box is empty. So we're just going to move this inside of here. And essentially, the reason why we want to do that is because not everything happens all at once. Because we send a request, it takes some time to actually get to where it needs to go and send a response back. So that's why we say .then to say, once we have this data, then we can do all of this. All right. And this basically just adds the task completed and all of that information. Another thing we can do is we also need to pass in our ID. So now in here, we need to make sure that our to-dos keep track of our IDs from our database. The reason why we want to do that is so that way we know which IDs of which to-dos we're either updating or deleting. So here, all we have to do is just say data.id. All right, because we're grabbing some type of data from our request that we sent. We're going to return, we're getting back some type of data. And inside of this data is the actual to-do information. In which case we can actually access it by saying data.id. All right, and then task, we can also do data.to-do, but new task is the exact same, so that's fine. And completed, we can just set it to false. If we really want, and probably to be a little more thorough, we probably could do data.completed, which should just be false anyways. And yeah. And then again, once we set our to-dos, we just clear this new task, and that should be it. So now another thing that we can also do, which we've done in our routes before, is on the off chance that an error happens. So here we can just say .catch. If we get some type of error, we can just console.log something saying like error with to do or error. And here we can just kind of print out what error we get. In this case, this will be more helpful for those who may not be getting the correct information from their database, but also tell us what our error is. So this is kind of similar to what we did in our routes. All right. All right, and that is all inside of add to do. All right. let's see. All right, so that was basically what we've had before, right? We inside of this list to do component, we just had use effect, render to dos, add to dos, and then the return. But now we need to create 2 more functions. Not only do we need to add to the to dos, but we also need to update and delete. So similar to how we created our add to do function, we're going to create a delete to do function. In this case, since this is going to be associated with the delete button on the to do component, this function can just pass in an ID. We're not going to be worrying about an event of some sort because that's going to be handled on the to do component. All right. Now here we have our simple delete to do, in which case the main thing that we're going to do is just call our service, specifically calling our delete to do function, passing in that proper ID, calling our .then, in which case we get some data. And then here, we can kind of just do exactly what we need to do to make sure that our state is in working order. So here, since we deleted a specific to-do, we need to update our to-do's state. Because our to-do state holds every single one of our to-dos, we need to make sure that we take out the one that we just deleted. So we're just going to do a very simple filter function to take out the to-do that ID matches the one that we get from here. All right, so we're going to just call our set to-dos function, right? That changes our state. But here, we're going to pass in to-dos and call the filter function on it. In which case, here, we're going to access a to-do in our filter. And here, we're going to say to-do.id does not equal ID. So now, for those who aren't familiar with the filter function, it basically filters an array and returns a new array based off of what function you passed in. In this case, we want to filter out to-dos, or we want to keep to-dos that do not have the ID of the one we just deleted. So that way it saves our to-dos in our state and removes the one that does equal the ID that we're trying to delete. All right, and just like how we did before, we'll do a simple catch, or we get an error. And we can do a console.log again. This part, not as needed, but it's kind of good to see what happens in case you actually do get an error. And yep, that's our delete to-dos. All right. And then last thing is we need to create our update to-dos. So we're going to create an update to-do function. And this is going to be kind of similar to our to-do, where it's going to actually be run in the to-do component. So we don't need to pass in a specific event, in which case we just need to know the information of what we're updating. So we need to know an ID, a task, and if it's been completed. All right. And here, again, we're just going to call our to-do service, specifically updating our to-do, passing in those exact same values, our ID, our task, and our completed, and doing a .then. So another good thing about creating this service is that we don't have to worry about what exactly happens. We already worked out that logic beforehand. So now we just know that we're getting some data back, and what do we need to do with that data? All right. So now here, again, we need to do something where we update our to-dos, because we updated a to-do that has possibly changed from completed to not completed, or the other way around. So what we need to do is call our set to-dos one more time. In which case, we need to make sure we pass in a new array that applies that completed. So probably the way that I came up with it is using the map function, in which case we access our to-do state and we apply this map function, where we grab a to-do. And here, I'm going to do a ternary statement that basically says if the to-do ID matches the ID that was passed in, I'm going to have it be a new object that contains everything that was in the previous to-do, and update it with this task and complete it. Otherwise, it'll just still be to-do. All right, so what's happening here is if the to-do matches the ID, I want to update the actual object of that to-do by here using this, what is it called? What is the ... operator called? Oh, the spread operator. So what the spread operator does, it kind of just contains everything that's in part of it and kind of just spreads it right there. So in this case, since to-do is some type of object, it's just going to apply this object, which is going to have a task, a completed, and all those properties. And we just update those properties by passing in task and completed. And if it doesn't have that ID, it just stays as what the to-do was beforehand. All right, and that updates our state. And again, we can do a dot catch. Or console.log error. All right. All right, and that's all of our functions. Now we need to apply them in the correct spots. All right. So first things first, we want to make sure that our create to do should be working, right? So essentially, since we have our add to do function already beforehand, if we take a look back down here in our to-do list, we should have a form that already says on submit add to do. So adding that should already be pretty much done. So let's say finish workshop. Add a task. It gets added here. And now what I should also do is check my database. All right, so I actually checked my database beforehand, and I only had that. Now, if I were to check it again, I still only have one. Oh, is it because I didn't save? I didn't save. Let me see. Finish workshop. There we go. It gets added to my database. And how I did that was just a simple PSQL query of selecting asterisks from my table, which we call to-dos. And yeah, so now I know that that's working. And now we just need to make sure that the last two are working, and we should be pretty much done.
What's the command to like go into your database?
Yeah. So if you're on a terminal or bash, you'd want to do PSQL-U. And if you had set it up properly, you should have a user called Postgres. So then you can just say Postgres. and then that'll connect you to the Postgres database. But now here, we want to make sure that we connect to the proper database that you created. And now what I mean by that is, that means going back to your config file for your backend, take a look at what you've put in your database. And for me, I called it TCSB to do. You might want to double check what you called it. You can also do \L and check all the database names you've created. For me, since I have quite a bit, it's kind of hard to kind of go through, but you should probably only have like 2 or 3. In which case, once you know the database name, you just do \C, which stands for connect, followed by the database name. So in this case, TCSB to do. And now it should say you're now connected to your database.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now that we got our being able to read everything from our database and adding to our database, now we need to finish update and delete. So like I said before, those functions needs to be passed into our to-do component as props, because that's where the functionality lies. So what we need to do is take a look at where we actually create this to-do component. And that is inside of our render. All right, our renders to-dos. So if you take a look at this line right here, it shows that we're creating a to-do component object by passing in these values as props. So we have key, we have ID, we have task, we have completed. All right. So now the last things we got to do are also pass in these 2 functions as props as well. So here, I'll call my prop delete to do, in which case I will pass in my delete to do function. And then I will also do update to do and pass in my update to do function. All right. So again, the main reason why we want to create these functions in this component is so that we can manipulate the state in this component. By creating a function, specifically the arrow notation function, it preserves the this keyword, meaning where we're currently located. If we call our function in our to-do component, it'll actually apply the different changes inside of to-do list, which is exactly what we want. All right. So now that we pass these in as props, we need to add that to our to-do. All right. So now let's head on into our to-do. And if you take a look here, we labeled all of our props on top here. We said, oh, we're getting an ID, we're getting a task, we're getting completed. Now that we added 2 more, we need to add those as well. So we need to add a delete to do as well as update to do. All right, now that we can access that. And also for the time being, I'm just gonna comment out this alert so that way we don't see the alert whenever you check it. You can keep it on if you want, but I'm just gonna comment it out for now. All right, so now we just need to be able to update our to-do. And this is gonna be fairly simple. All we have to do is just call our function update to do, which we're getting from our props. And all we have to do is just pass in ID, our task, and completed. If I can spell it correctly. In this case, we can say not completed, because it's going to do the opposite of what completed is. All right, so by default, it'll be false. So when you click on the on checked, it'll pass in a true, which will make it change and update so that it is true. All right. And because this is part of the onChecked function, which we had beforehand, that was tied to the input right here, which was on change, we want to uncheck and call our unchecked function. So now we should have functionality that checks to make sure that if we check this, nice. Update to do is not a function. Let's see, I got to make sure I did it correctly. Update to do. Update to do. Well, that's embarrassing.
Do we have to do to-do service dot update to do? Or for the to-do list? Oh wait, never mind.
No, yeah, there's a lot of update to dos here and there. So yeah, we want to make sure we're getting it from here, which it should be a function.
I think I just saw this error on my own code, but I forgot how I fixed it.
Oh no. Update to do. It could be in here. Update to do. Update to do.
Oh, it's because there's an else statement because we check if stuff's completed. So that needs to. You see that second instance of the to do component? I think you forgot to add the update to do and delete to do props to it.
That's right. That makes sense. Right. Thank you, Casey. Delete to do. Update to do. Update. All right, and then if I check that, okay. Thank you, Casey. So yeah, just like what Casey said, we got to do it for both or instances whenever we create our to-do component. We got to make sure we pass it in the props in this one as well as this one as well. And yeah, since I checked the cooking dinner, I can check it to make sure it applied to my database, which it does. All right, so now that I know it's working on my database, last but not least, we got to make sure we delete. So this one's going to be simple as well. Since we passed in our delete function, we just need to call it here. And here I'm just going to comment out the alert so that I don't get alerted. And just call my delete function and pass in ID. And I get ID from our component. And now it should be working. So now if I show completed task, I can delete cook dinner, check it on my database, and it's gone. Yay. So hopefully you guys have a fully functional React application. Yeah, these last parts were very easy because of the way we set it up, right? Because all we got to do is just call a function and it does it for us, which is really nice.
Can I see your use effect function in to-do list.js?
Yeah, of course. So the main thing you want to look at is just this. We created a dummy data, but that's not as important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so here we just call our read to-dos function and then just call our set to-dos, which was our state changing function, setting back on the what data we're getting.
I'm not able to like add new tasks in my database. So like I don't know. It might be. Can I hit your create to do? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, it's probably on the add to do was my guess. On the add to do, you just call your create to do function from the service, passing in new task, which is from your state, and then making sure you pass in ID as well when you concatenate the to dos.
I don't know why it's
Mm.
it's exactly identical, I think.
Mm.
Or maybe I'm missing something.
You might also make sure that you don't have the set new task to blank. Make sure that comes after you do the set to dos. That's another thing I noticed. Because if you have it like over here outside of the service, it'll actually set it to blank and might cause some issues. But yeah.
I have a question. So do you have to have the backend folder running, I guess, while we're doing this?
Oh yes, that's another thing I should have mentioned.
Okay.
Yes, you want.
Yes.
Yes, you probably want that to be running so that way it can actually connect.
Okay.
That could also be another reason why your data you're not adding to your that could be it too. Yeah, so you want to make sure you're running your React and your backend as well.
What's the command for running the backend? Sorry.
No, you're good. All you have to do is just go to your backend folder, right? So making sure you're in your backend folder that we created. All you have to do is just npm start. Right, because we set up that script to make it easy for us, so that way we just do npm start, and it should start up a nodemon server. And if you want to make sure that it's working, all you have to do is just go to localhost 8080, and you probably should see something, and that should mean that it's that server's running. Yes, I completely forgot. Both servers need to be running. Yeah, Lulu, we were able to get it to work now that your server's running.
No.
Oh no.
It's all good. Let me think.
Eddie, can you show the create to do in the to do service? If that might be the issue.
That could also be it, yeah. Yeah, make sure you return the fetch dot then response JSON. Stringify the new task. And make sure it's a post and a content type application JSON.
It must be something like a typo then.
Oh no. Yeah, I could probably, I'll look at it to see if there's any issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I can also look at like your database or your like code base later and check.
Okay,
everything.
that works. Yeah, that's basically it from my end. And I think Casey, you're probably gonna talk more about other stuff too, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna go over the React router really quick, which is all front end. So if you're having trouble with your back end, it shouldn't be an issue for this part. Just give me a sec to set up real
Actually, this might be
quick.
a good time if for like a short, like 1 or 2 minute break.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, I need to use the restroom, so anyone else who needs water, go to the restroom, go for it.
Yeah, whenever everyone's back, we can go ahead and get started. I don't know if Lulu and Tristan are there, but cool. I think Lulu's back. Tristan, are you there? Just want to double check. Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is all front end. It's going to be a lot lighter than what we've been doing so far today. Let me see. Okay, make sure I share the right win. Oh wait, oopsies. Sorry, I'm going to share my whole desktop so you guys can see the React side too. Okay, cool. I think this should be good. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to show you all is how to use the React router. Can you guys all, okay, I just want to make sure you guys hear me. Cool. Basically, we're talking about how with React, we can make single page web applications. And right now our app is like a single page. You can't really navigate anywhere. It's just a to-do list. So I'm going to show you how you can create other components that act as other pages, but really aren't. So just to like kind of illustrate that, the only thing we ever render is app.js, which right now just has a to-do list in it. But I'm going to show you how to use the React router so that we can render different components on different paths. So like if you typed in the browser / something else, then it would render a different component. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create a really simple home component. It's not going to be styled or anything, but just so that we have something else to navigate to. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my components folder. I'm just going to create a new file. I'll just call this home.js. And then I'm just going to make it super simple. So I'm just going to import React from React. Oops, I can spell that right. Oh, there we go. And then I'm also going to just create that simple functional component. So const home equals to parentheses, an arrow function. All we have to do in here is return something. So for now, I'm just going to return a div, and I'm just going to put a header in there that says home page. You can put whatever you want in here. It doesn't really matter. And then the last thing we have to do for a React component is export it. So export default home. And that's basically what our home page is going to be right now. So go ahead and get that set up. Okay, cool. So we have this other component. Now I have to go back into my app.js, and I have to actually set up the router so that I can switch between this home page, and then I can switch between the to-do list or whatever components I'd like to use. So I'm just going to go to, or actually before that, we're going to install something. So I'm going to just go ahead and stop my front end really quick. And I'm going to run npm install react -router -dom -save. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and that should install the packages I need in order to create it. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that really quick. Okay. Okay, and then once you've got that installed, you're going to go back to your app.js, because if you remember, this is the only component that actually renders on the screen. So this is where we're going to add our React router. So at the very top, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import that. So I'm just going to go ahead and import, and then I'm going to import browser router as router comma route from the package we just installed. So React router dom. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and use these two things, router and route, in our app component. So instead of just rendering the to-do list, I'm going to go ahead and actually delete that. And instead of that div with the to-do list component in it, I'm going to create a router. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Just like as if we had created our own component, we're going to use the router. And then inside the router is going to be a bunch of routes. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the first one up. So route, and then in here, we have to specify the path. So the path is essentially just the stuff up here in your top browser bar after localhost 3000. So if I want my path, let's say I'm going to set up the home page first. So I'm going to set path equals to just slash. And then I'm going to specify the component that I want to render. And this one's going to be home. And I just remembered we do have to import it at the top. So underneath where I imported to-do list earlier, I'm going to go ahead and import home from, let's see, /components/home. Let me go ahead and save that. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to add to this is just this property exact. So that means that the route on the top of my browser has to match this path exactly for this component to render. Otherwise, if I had another route with a path like, I don't know, hello, something like that, then both this home component and that other component would render because technically slash would match up. Okay. So if I go ahead and save that actually, and I'm going to run my front end again. So I'm just going to run npm start here, just so we can see what happened right now. And if I have any issues, so I'm going to go ahead, that's reloading. Wait a second. My computer is like overheating all the time. So let's see. Come on. Okay, there we go. And so now I have my home page instead of my to-do list. Okay, cool. So now we actually want to be able to navigate to that to-do list component. So I'm going to go ahead and add another route. I'm going to give it a path equal to / to-do list. And this could be anything you want. The component is going to be the, let's see, to-do list that I imported above. And then I'm just going to also make this one exact. It's not as critical, but it doesn't hurt to have that in there. So if I go ahead and save now, and then if I navigate to my React app, I still have my home page here, which is great. And then if I go to to-do list, you should see your to-do list pop up now. So that's how we technically use the React router to render different components or different kind of like fake pages, you could think of it as. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about what we've done so far or having any issues? Cool. Okay, and this is basically most of it, except I'm going to show you really quickly how to use the router within your components. Let's say you want to click a button or you want to click a link that goes to your to-do list, because you don't want the user to have to type in the browser bar there. So real quickly, we're going to go ahead. I'm just going to go back to the home page. and we're gonna set up some buttons and links. I'll show you like several ways you could do this. So the first thing we're gonna do on my home.js file is I'm going to import some other stuff from React Router DOM. So I'm gonna go ahead and import link. And how else do I do this? Okay, use history and with router from React Router DOM. So I'm gonna go ahead and save that. Okay, so there are like, I'm gonna just go over 3 quick ways that you can use this router. Let's say the easiest way actually is you don't even need the stuff I just imported. You can just use an A tag. So if I do an A tag, let's see, href equals to, I can just do whatever path name we specified. So let's say I want to do list here. I'm just gonna call go to do list, and then I'm gonna go ahead and save that. Okay, so if I go back to my home page and refresh, you'll see a link. If I hit that, it's gonna navigate to my to-do list, which is great. So that's the first way, the quickest way. Another way to do it is using this link that we imported. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do this right underneath. We're just gonna do link. It takes in a property too, so that would be the path name. So if I want this to be to-do list as well, I'm just gonna say using link. And then if I go ahead and save that, and I oh, not that page, refresh. Looks really ugly, but if I click using link, it'll also move to the last page. And then the last one I wanted to show everyone is, let's say you like have a function in your component, and after they click on a certain thing, you want it to automatically navigate to another page. So it's a little trickier because you can't just use like an href or a link. So that's why we have the use history and with router hooks. So the first thing we're gonna need to do is I'm gonna need to wrap my home page with this with router hook. So on the line export default home, I'm gonna add with router, and then I'm passing in the home component before I export it. So that's the first step. And the second thing is, let's see, I'm just gonna create another function actually. Let's say I just want to const go to list. And then I'm just gonna make this an arrow function for now. And inside here, it's just we're gonna use the use history hook. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna set up a constant up here called history, and I'm gonna set that equal to the use history hook. So that returns something that I can use to navigate between pages. So in my go to list function, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use that history object. I'm gonna call .push on it. And then I'm gonna pass what route I want it to render. So if I do to-do list here, let's see. Yeah, I think that's it pretty much. So if you wanted to do other, like let's say send data to the backend before you switch pages, you would just add this in here. And then lastly, we wanna actually use this function in, let's say maybe a button. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a button. My on click for this button is going to be equal to go to list, and then with a button, just so that pops up. And then if I go ahead and go back to my home page, should see a button here, and it should navigate to your to-do list as well. So those are just 3 ways that you can implement that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this part. Does anyone have any questions about anything? Okay, because otherwise, I think me and Eddie were just going to do a really quick review and then run the Kahoot game to end today's session. So I guess I could just give the really quick React overview, and then Eddie, we can switch off and you can go over the back end. Okay, cool. I guess just really quick overview. So in React, it's a single page web application. So the only thing that gets rendered is app.js. We added that router in there to render different components. We have our to-do list component here. We have state that keeps track of to-dos, new tasks. Use effect is basically kind of like a lifecycle method if you've used class-based components. So you can specify, in this case, by passing in an empty array, this gets called every time the component renders. Let's say if we wanted it to get called whenever a piece of state updates, we could add something like this into there as well. Render to-dos, that's just to map and generate all our to-do components based on the data. And then at the end of a component, we always return JSX, which gets translated into HTML. And you use the curly braces to insert JavaScript into there. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Our to-dos, we pass in these certain props. And we use those inside that component. And then Eddie, if you want to quickly go over backend stuff.
Yeah. All right. So to kind of go over kind of like a quick summary of the backend. Let me just clear this up a little bit. So our backend essentially is composed of different parts. The main part is our actual server, right? This is where all the magic happens on the backend. We are creating all these different middleware modules that we're using to kind of help our server and our application run so that it runs these specific things that we want it to run, like parsing the body or being able to use different routes. So the main part is running our server. We just need to listen at a specific port, and that's where our server is running. All right. We also add different routes to our server. So if a specific route is sent to our server, we want to run specific things based off of what was given to us. And we can specify not only by the paths, but by the methods that were given as well. Either get, post, put, delete, right? Depending on what was asked of us. Then we also had to set up a database in order to kind of connect our server application that we created. We need to be able to connect to our database. Here we set up our basic configurations, and inside of here, we were able to use those configurations to actually connect using something called Sequelize. Sequelize allows us to connect to our database from our server. This makes things easier to kind of run our SQL queries necessary to actually update, create, delete, and even read all of our data in our database, right? So we were able to kind of set that up by our controller. And if you remember, our controller basically used a bunch of Sequelize functions like create, find all, update, right? Those are all Sequelize functions that actually manipulate our data. And essentially we organized it in a way so that it's easier to kind of understand, right? We have our configuration for our database. We have our controller, which is essentially all of our Sequelize functions that actually changes and updates our database. And our models is essentially setting up our Sequelize, making sure that we have the proper format for our database. And last but not least, our routes, which we just went over, making sure we're going to the correct, if someone is asking for a specific route in a specific method, we want to run the specific function to make sure that we're sending the proper information that they're asking of us. And that's basically the backend, right? Yay. All right. I guess, yeah, now's a good time to kind of finish off with our Kahoot. Hopefully you guys know what a Kahoot is by now.
Here, I can go ahead and share.
Okay, perfect. Oh, nice.
But yeah, basically the top 3 people are gonna get gift cards. So I hope you all remember what we just said.
Kind of embarrassing, but I know what a Kahoot is. I've just never done one. Do I just go to the website and use the game pin?
Yeah, so go to
Just go to
kahoot.it.
Eddie, you can.
Yeah, right there. So you go to kahoot.it, and then it should prompt you to type in a game pin. All right, for Alice's first time doing a Kahoot.
And then you want to be able to see my screen and your screen at the same time, because mine's going to have the questions and what the answers are, and then you have to select on your screen which one.
Okay, this might be a learning curve for me. This is also so embarrassing because I know that Lena's youngest is like the Kahoot master and he's like so young and I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, is that everyone? I think so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and start it then. Which of the following is not an advantage of using React.js? Okay. Yeah, so it can be used to create interfaces, but not servers. That's why we have Node.js on the back end. It actually does use a virtual DOM, which is pretty cool. And then JSX is what we used. We returned from our components, and it does make web apps easier to maintain. You can pass data to a child component using Cool. So we do pass data straight to a child component using props. You can store and handle data in React using specifically on the front end side. State and props. Okay, you can pass data from child components to parent components using what? So it's like, how did we pass information from the to-do back to the to-do list? Yeah, so passing and using callback functions in the child. So it's like that delete to do function and update to do function that Eddie passed into each to do. Okay, Tristan at the top. Okay, what can I use to load data into my component when it first renders on the screen? They use effect hook. Okay, what is the correct way to display the value of the name prop in the profile component? So we passed in that name property, and I want to insert it into this h1 tag. So what would be the correct way to do that? Yep, so we have to use those curly braces around anything that we want to be treated as JavaScript instead of HTML. Okay. How can I increment the age state? So we have age set up here. I will have this function that I want to add 1 to whatever the age currently is. So how would I do that? Okay, yep, you'd use that set age function that we get when we use the use state hook there. And you never want to actually straight change the state like this in the red option, because that's very bad. Okay, cool. What code should I add to the button tag so that clicking it increments age? So we have that increment age function up here, but we want it to be called whenever this button right here is clicked. So how can I set that up? Okay, yeah, so it's this last one, because firstly with React, we have to capitalize the C and click. And then if we have JavaScript, because increment age is a function, then we're going to have to use those curly braces. And then lastly, it's not the circle or the yellow option, because we want to just pass in the straight function, because it doesn't get called right away on the button, only when it's clicked. So you have to pass it in without calling it. Because this one has those parentheses there. Okay, what framework are we using to create our backend server? Okay, yep. We're using Express. We are using PostgreSQL, but that's for the database. That's not the actual server that gets run. Okay, what does CRUD stand for? Okay, yeah, create, read, update, delete. So basically all the routes that Eddie created for our backend. Okay. How would you create a database in P-SQL? SQL. SQL. Well, good job, everyone.
Yeah, so with that, it actually doesn't matter if you capitalize it or not, but most of the time you'll see like P-SQL commands capitalized. That's just how it usually is, but it actually doesn't matter if it's capitalized or not.
Okay, what is SQLize? Okay. Eddie, if you want to, I don't know if you want to talk about this one or.
Yeah, essentially it's how we connect our Express application with our database, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, true or false? A post request sends data within the body of the request. Okay, cool. Think 2 more questions. Okay, we can easily make a call to our backend using what JavaScript function? Okay, cool. Yep. Fetch.
I will say request is another module you can use, but it's typically not the one you should use. Also, because it's deprecated and it's not updated anymore, so typically you'd want to just use fetch.
Okay, last question. Okay, what is the backend?
Really made you guys read. Nice.
Okay.
So yeah, the red is the back end. Blue is actually the front end. Yellow, I think I found something called DevOps, and that's the definition of what DevOps is. and green is the definition of a database. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Standing. Got Jenna. 7. Dang, 15 out of 15. Tristan, congrats.
And one
Thank
thing
you.
also,
Okay, yeah, we'll let Lena know that the 3 of you placed in the top 3, and she'll be sending you an e-gift card, I think. But yeah, that's pretty much it, I think, right?
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully you guys have a fully working application, and yeah, hopefully it was fun and you learned something at least. I would suggest maybe try playing around with it, seeing what else you can do to like kind of create other stuff as well. But yeah, I guess that's it, huh?
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you. So I'm listening
This
to
was
like
really great.
their
Thank you.
concerns.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, thanks guys. That was awesome. You guys did a fantastic job. But yeah, so you guys want to talk about it and like, you know, what worked and what didn't work. We don't have to do this now if you don't want, and we don't have to do it at all if you don't think it's useful, but I would find it very useful. So I would really appreciate it if we did. But
feel like
Yeah.
we should just do that right now. We have
Yeah.
extra time. Might
Yeah.
as well.
Might as well.
Cool.
Oh, do we want to keep recording or?
Sure. Yeah,
Oh,
you can stop the record. Yeah, that's right, because people are going to be seeing this afterwards. So
All right.